I'll tell you how I ended up in education, and it really began with the field of outdoor education, but I'll trace that back to my childhood. My mother was an early childhood educator. She worked with Head Start, very young learners, and would come home with stories of joy about children being so excited about learning. They did a lot of sensory things and a lot of experiential type of things, which I think is common for young learners. We tend to weed that out through our education systems as children get older. But that really sparked to me the joy of learning. I was a very curious learner. I learned a lot of things on my own. But my mother always told me, you need to be a teacher when you get older. And I always said, nah, that's not for me. I couldn't ever see myself in a classroom. I had no interest. When it came time to go to college, she wanted me to go through a teacher education program, and I just wasn't interested. But another thing going on was that my father, he had grown up on a farm out in the country, always loved the outdoors, spent a lot of time taking us camping, and just really gained a lot of spirituality out of being in the outdoors. And I think he tried to instill that in us as well, me and my siblings. And so I also wanted a job outdoors. And I didn't know that there was this thing called outdoor education where you could teach but be outdoors. And once I learned about that, I was sold. And so I majored in outdoor education and outdoor recreation in college. And that's really where I entered in. So I went very soon after college to work with a residential outdoor education program for Houston Public Schools, and stayed there for many, many years until eventually moving over into higher education. Why did education excite me? I think part of that comes from my mother, who was an early childhood teacher, who was always shared stories about how very excited her learners were. And I thought if there's a way to keep that going for other people and get them excited about learning, pique their curiosity, get them enthusiastic and engaged, then that's something that I wanted to be a part of. I have been in the field of experiential education for many, many, many years, most of my career. And for a long time, I think the field of experiential education met with a lot of resistance. We were trying to say this is a very powerful way to learn, learning through direct experience integrated with reflection, figuring out what we learned from this thing to move over to that thing and keep propelling our learning forward. But with our standards-based mentality in our school systems, there were a lot of teachers who would say, well, that's very nice. That sounds like a lot of fun, but I have these standards I have to teach. I have these standardized tests I have to get my learners ready for. We can't do that stuff. We have to stick to the worksheets and the content and all of that kind of stuff. So I think experiential education for a long time was sort of something pushed off to the sides. It was trying to make its way into mainstream education, but just couldn't seem to get there. We'll jump ahead to today, and I think the entire view of experiential learning is different. One of the things that happened is that there were charter schools that started sort of from the grassroots level of building schools based around learners and what was best for how learners learn experientially and personalized learning and individualized learning. So the charter school movement, I think, really helped elevate that quite a lot and started working with project-based learning where students make their way through school completing projects rather than just finishing out a grade level and moving on to the next. So charter schools were a big part of that. Another part of it has to do with achievement gaps, which exist for various groups, sometimes ethnicity, racially based groups, sometimes socioeconomic groups, different kinds of achievement gaps that existed. And the discovery that experiential ways of learning and knowing were very powerful in helping to close some of those gaps, or at least lessen the gaps. So today, when I say experiential learning, most educators know exactly what I'm talking about. 20 years ago, when I would use that term, I would be asked, what's that? It just wasn't a known thing. So I'm excited today because experiential learning has finally made its way into mainstream education. But maybe one day we'll get to the place where experiential education just equals good education, and it never is identified as something that's different than just what education should be. So maybe one day we'll get to the point where we don't have to say experiential education anymore. It's just education. I believe that one part of this is that I have over time recognized that I'm a slow reader, and I also have sometimes difficulty paying attention. And that is not unusual in my experience over all these years of some of the students who come to our program. who have recognized that they too had some struggles in their K through 12 schooling, and they recognize what worked for them. I'm excited because I think experiential education is one of the pathways forward to a sustainable society and a sustainable planet. The experiential education program here has transformed me personally through the discovery that experiential education is something that could even happen in higher education. To learn that there was a program here, a master's degree in experiential education, I think it kind of blew my mind when I discovered it. It was almost as if this is what I have been looking for my entire career. I knew early on that I wanted to work outdoors with children for a long time, but that eventually I wanted to move into teaching in higher education. What that would look like, I didn't know. What field could I go into? I wasn't sure. I wanted to stay in outdoor education, but the positions in higher ed and outdoor ed are also very few and far between. So to discover a master's degree in experiential education and to discover this started in the early 70s, that the program here was a part of the very beginning of the labeling of the term experiential ed. I'm just in awe and so grateful for those people who had the vision that this is something that needed to be taking place in colleges so that we could prepare people to then go out and teach that and spread that through the rest of our education systems. So it transformed me, I think personally, to discover the continual opening up of this field. We're all doing our little part to do that, and it's just a very exciting place where it's been right now. As time passes, I just get more and more convinced that this is absolutely the most powerful way to learn. And I guess that in itself has been transformational for me. So we began what we call a low residency hybrid cohort program. We started that in the summer of 2021 after a period of time where more and more we were being contacted by people who were very interested in our master's in experiential education program, but for whatever reasons, other life commitments, they could not move to Minnesota or move to Mankato, Minnesota for 2 years to complete their program. And so we wrestled for a long time with considering, should we begin also an online program? But our philosophy of experiential learning didn't mesh with online education, and we were resistant to that for a very long time. And finally, we got to the point where we thought we probably need to do this because there are people who need this program, and we need to find a way to bring this to them. So we actually started designing that before the pandemic was even anything on anyone's radar. We started in this direction that we would have it. But we didn't want to move to a totally online program because we so much value the relationships, the peer learning that happens, the experiential active learning kinds of things that are very difficult to do sometimes virtually. And so we sort of came up with this middle ground of we will have some in-person components and mostly online components. So every term, the people in the cohort come together for 2 or 3 consecutive days in person up in the Minneapolis area at our satellite campus site up there. And the rest of it is online. So we have a way to keep bringing them together for connections and learning that can't happen online, and then figure out ways as best we can to be creative with keeping experiential learning going in a virtual way. So now we're looking at the second cohort starting this next summer, and we're hoping that that will continue to grow. And we know that we will continue to learn how to best deliver that. And the hesitancies that I might have about it are simply that it casts us as the instructors back into a learning mode of wanting to deliver an incredible program and yet knowing that we're still learning. If I could give some advice to educators who are teaching in schools who want to teach more experientially but aren't really sure how to get started, or have concerns that they can't do it well, or have concerns that it takes a lot of time or a lot of talent, my advice would be is just to start with small steps. Just try something. So many experiential educators can tell you stories about their early days when they tried things that just didn't work. They tried it again a different way, and then a different way, and a different way. And eventually, just like anything that we practice on, we get it better and better each time we do it. It can be very simple things. Like instead of having your students sit at their desks for a lesson, have them get up and move around in different formations. It can be as simple as something like that. And just keep advancing and advancing and advancing to become more experiential, wrapping in more reflection where they're self-reflecting and self-assessing their learning, and just keep the ball rolling that way. It's the same thing. It's the same advice I might have for outdoor educators who teach inside a classroom. How do I do this? We don't have any woods near us or any parks. What do we do? You've got school grounds, and probably, not always, but probably there's some grass somewhere nearby or some type of atmosphere that's a little bit more than the brick walls. And just getting outside and taking a walk can be the simplest way to get started. Then start adding things to the walk. Now start incorporating some of what you do: math, language arts, art, PE, music, whatever you can, and start incorporating those things into what you're doing during your walk outside. So I guess it's small steps. Take it easy on yourself, do it little by little. And once you start building some confidence and feeling like that you're figuring out some things that are working, I think you'll be sold and ready to take off and flight after that.